About 400 years ago, a Dutch trade ship departed from what is now the Netherlands, laden with treasures of gold and gems destined for Indonesian shores in exchange for spices. Accompanying this vessel were 341 passengers and crew members. Little did they know, the greatest peril of their journey would not be the wrath of the ocean, but a dark, treacherous scheme unfolding within the decks of the ship itself. What followed would become a harrowing tale of mutiny and shipwreck, one that would claim the lives of several of those aboard, forever haunting the annals of maritime history. You're watching Into the Mist, and I am Lieutenant Wabi Hayes. This is my first-hand account of surviving the infamous Batavia 1628 disaster. On October 28, 1628, Captain Francisco Pelsaert led a fleet of ships from the Dutch island of Texel, setting a course south around Africa to Batavia, the capital of the Dutch East Indies, which is the present-day Jakarta. These 8 ships were the property of the Dutch East India Company known as VOC, with Francisco commanding the flagship, also named Batavia. At the age of 41, I, along with around 70 other soldiers, boarded the Batavia, employed by the VOC. Our mission was 5 years of garrison duty in the Dutch East Indies. However, right from the get-go, this expedition hit a rough patch. Even before leaving the North Sea, storms and choppy waters wreaked havoc, breaking up the fleet and leaving only 3 ships to soldier on. On the Batavia, Francisco scrambled to readjust plans, but the loss of 5 ships meant they'd be coming back with way less spice. But that wasn't the only problem. The command setup on the remaining ships was an even bigger mess. While other ships had 1 captain each, the Batavia had 2. Francisco and another guy named Ariane Jacobs. Francisco was leading the fleet, so it made sense for him to be on the flagship. But the Dutch East India Company had a rule that every ship, even the flagship, needed its own captain. Plus, the captain of the flagship couldn't be the fleet captain and vice versa. And to make things worse, Francisco and Ariane had some bad blood between them. 2 years back, when they were doing similar duties, Ariane got roaring drunk one night and started mouthing off at Francisco in front of everyone. Francisco saw this as a direct challenge to his authority, so when the fleet returned to the Netherlands, he publicly rebuked Ariane. From then on, trust between them was shattered. Yet they were now in a position where they had to cooperate to steer the fleet safely. Ariane, however, seemed to be biding his time for payback, and his chance came in the form of a junior merchant named Geronimus Cornelis, who happened to be Ariane's second in command. Now, unlike Ariane, Geronimus didn't have a grudge against Francisco, but he did harbor some dark, sinister thoughts. There were rumors that he had managed to avoid arrest for heretical religious beliefs when he first came on board, which he wasn't shy about discussing even on ship, which might explain why he and Ariane seemed to get along so well. Together, they conceived a mutinous plot against Francisco. As part of their scheme, they planned for several crewmen to assault a wealthy married woman on board. The idea was for these crewmen to be caught in the act or immediately after, so that Ariane and Geronimus could argue that Francisco's punishment for them would be too harsh, inciting the mutiny. However, fate had other plans. The crewman who volunteered for the task went below deck to carry out the assault on the 27-year-old woman, but in the darkness of the hull, she was unable to identify her attackers. Shockingly, this led to the matter being completely dismissed. After their first plan flopped, Ariane and Geronimus had to come up with something else. So Ariane took matters into his own hands and steered the ship off its intended course. Since there were no instruments to gauge their position accurately, Francisco was left clueless about what was happening around him. Then came the night of June 3, 1629. While the Batavia sailed under full sail, the lookout reported to me seeing white water breaking over shallows. I hurried to Ariane, but he decided against changing course, thinking it was just a moonlit reflection. However, shortly after, disaster struck. The Batavia collided at full speed with a coral reef near the Wabi group of islands. This wasn't part of Ariane and Geronimus's plan. Their intention in veering off course was either to make Francisco look bad or to give themselves more time to come up with a better plan. But what happened was far from their intentions, and it was a result of Ariane's severe miscalculation. It was this time when Francisco laid eyes on me for the first time. While sailors and soldiers pitched in to shuttle people to nearby islands, I did my part, helping passengers disembark, passing out supplies, offering reassurance, giving directions, doing whatever was necessary. Despite our efforts, some passengers slipped into the ocean through the cracked hull, never to resurface. It was a terrifying ordeal, and little did I know it was just the beginning. But amidst such chaos, my fate took a turn. As I worked tirelessly during the rescue efforts, a group of sturdy, loyal soldiers started to gather around me. Though I was just an ordinary soldier at that time, through the trials and tribulations of those harrowing moments, these young, spirited individuals somehow saw leadership qualities in me. Following the wreck, Francisco made a bold decision. He led a group of 48 people, including Ariane, back into the Indian Ocean, heading for the mainland to find help. Meanwhile, back on the island, several days after the wreck, the Batavia finally succumbed to the sea, claiming another 40 lives. But Geronimus somehow made it to shore. And you won't believe it, his return was actually the tipping point that set off the whole disaster. Because with Francisco and Arian out of the picture, he took the reins as the new leader on the island, and we suddenly found ourselves under his authority, a fact that hadn't quite sunk in before. Taking charge, Geronimus swiftly rounded up his fellow mutineers and immediately seized all weapons, food supplies, boats, and rafts. Then he devised a plan to reduce the survivor count from around 250 to 120. He began by sending 45 passengers to Seal Island, which was about a mile away. To mask his true intentions, he spun it as a resource-gathering mission, knowing full well they wouldn't go willingly if they knew they were going to die. Then came my turn. Geronimus persuaded me and my crew to set sail for West Wabi Island, roughly 5.5 miles off, in search of vital resources. We were to signal back with smoke if we found anything. What we didn't know was that he had his men primed to head for West Wabi Island if they caught sight of our smoke signals, with orders to slaughter us unarmed mercenaries. That is, if we even made it to the island in the first place. After we left, things just kept getting worse there. Geronimus played God, choosing who would live and who would die. His men would simply take people out into the ocean and toss them overboard. However, while the fates of 300 Batavia survivors hung in the balance, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, God was listening to me. On West Wabi Island, we struck gold freshwater, marsupials, and birds to survive on. But here we were, completely oblivious to the danger brewing behind us, sending up smoke signals, unaware that we were essentially beckoning our own demise. Weeks passed in this state until one day, survivors who had been dispatched to another island arrived on a makeshift raft, bringing with them the grim truth. It was a harsh awakening, but by then our signals had reached Geronimus, and he now knew that we had stumbled upon crucial resources. Despite being just a handful of unarmed survivors, we posed a threat to Geronimus. He realized that if we were alive, there was a chance we could attract a passing ship with our signals, exposing his treachery. So he had every reason to come after me and my men, but this time I knew it. With the limited resources I had, the best option was to instruct the mercenaries to fashion basic weapons for our defense. We also used limestone, coral, and debris to construct a small fortress, bolstering our defenses. On Francisco's end, after enduring 33 days at sea, his longboat carrying the 48 crewmen finally encountered assistance. Upon reaching mainland Batavia, he met with the Governor-General to discuss the shipwreck. Some crewmen revealed to Francisco that Arian and Geronimus had approached them to join a mutiny, so he ordered Arian's immediate arrest. But despite learning about the mutiny plot, nobody could have anticipated the full extent of the situation unfolding on the island. Anyways, a week after his arrival in Batavia, Francisco set out once more to rescue us, this time using a ship named the Sardam. Still, it took him 2 months to reach our location. Meanwhile, back on Wabi Island, Geronimus had dispatched a few men according to his scheme to eliminate us and seize the resources we had gathered. However, unbeknownst to him, we were already prepared. We caught them off guard, sending them into retreat. Naturally, Geronimus was far from pleased. He promptly ordered a second attack, this time leading the charge himself with a much larger force. My soldiers and I fought with every ounce of strength we had, and by stroke of luck, we managed to capture Geronimus along with 3 of his top men. While Geronimus was held captive, some of his loyalists who had escaped regrouped on their island under a new leader, Waterloose. In late September, these men returned to West Wabi Island, armed with muskets. Obviously, our makeshift weapons were no match for these firearms, and it seemed like we were on the brink of being overrun. But once again, my fortune favored me. During the fight, I caught sight of a ship in the distance, and to my ultimate surprise, it was Francisco's. At that moment, I felt like the luckiest guy alive, but the job wasn't over yet. I hopped into a small boat with some of my men and rowed towards the ship. Up close, Francisco recognized me immediately. We embraced like long-lost brothers, and he hurried back with me to the island to lend a hand. Luckily, Francisco's crew beat them there, and Water and his men surrendered. Francisco conducted thorough investigations, leading to the execution of each of Geronimus' men. Geronimus himself received the harshest punishment. He was sentenced to the breaking wheel on October 2nd, 1629.
On their journey back, Francisco promoted Wabi Hayes to the rank of sergeant, doubling his former salary. When they reached Batavia, Wabi was hailed as a national hero and promoted to lieutenant, with a significant pay raise once again. The enduring traces of defensive walls and stone shelters constructed by Wabi Hayes and his men on West Wabi Island stand as Australia's earliest known European constructions. Today, visitors can still marvel at the Wabi Hayes stone fort and the well.